every bit of this advice should give listeners confidence that there are ways to win other than by price. That the sort of typical financial buyer coming from a big city wearing fancy watch isn't always going to win. And that's the point. That's why this is such a great opportunity. You don't have to be some industry expert with a committed fund of money in order to win a deal.
I think a lot of these other strategies are A, just best practices, and B, a great example of you can still have a seat at the table even if you can't be the highest bid. All right, guys, welcome back to another week of Main Street Deals. Super excited to be back on here with my partner, Sam. Sam, great to see you this morning.
Hey, Kevin. Good to be here, man. This will be another good one for our little chit chat every week.
Well, and all the listeners should be grateful that I was able to peel you away from the Masters for 60 minutes this morning. A lot going on in the news right now, and seeing some memes out there about Tiger Woods driving down the fairway. That's
Not
too
good.
soon, a little too soon.
Way too soon, but very entertaining nevertheless.
Absolutely. Great to be back with you. In keeping with prior weeks, quick update on state of the firm, because I think it's fascinating. I don't know what your deal list was like. I had a wild end to Q1. So our numbers jumped substantially. I know just in the last 7 days. So, this is spilling into Q2 now, but in the last 7 days, I've closed 5 deals, which is wild. That takes us to total closed deals for SMB Law Group of 368. So we're rapidly approaching 400 in 4 years. We probably won't get there. I think our technical anniversary date is May 2nd, but really close. So just to put in perspective, Q1 and Q2, right now we're in the first week of April. I'm not sure when this will drop, but so Q1 and Q2 of 2026 so far is 32 closed deals for 144 million in enterprise value.
Amazing.
Pretty mind-blowing.
Amazing. What's funny is that typically M&A is seasonal, that the end of a year, Q4 is a huge windfall.
Yep.
Q1 tends to be really slow as sellers get their financials together, tax returns filed, and then go to market in Q2.
Yep.
And we just saw a reverse of that.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I have my hunches. I think the government shutdown probably played a little bit into that, but any thoughts?
I honestly have no, other than like anecdotal thoughts, nothing tangible to explain it. I mean, that's kind of M&A. It can be cyclical and unpredictable. And yet what's also weird is you just said 5 closings last week. My guess is you're probably back to being almost at capacity again, because it is incredible. The inbound folks that are coming saying I'm under LOI or I need help with an LOI. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
It's been a fun run.
No, for sure. Speaking of which, I know you and our partner Eric spent some time last week talking about the sell side. And I thought maybe we'd keep that going a little bit this week. But talking back to buyers, I think most of our listeners here are either in the operator or buying space, which is great if you're a seller. Not to say we don't want you, but speaking back to buyers a little bit, I think with that framework, and if you didn't catch the prior episode, maybe hit pause here and jump back and listen to last week's episode to get a good foundation about the sell side process and things like that. But I thought it'd be good to pick up today and talk back to the buyers, with a little bit of that foundation about the sell side process. What are some of the strategies that buyers can use to actually win at that process? And to your point about things being kind of red hot right now, that's true, including competition for businesses, right? I still think it's never been a better time for a seller to sell a business in large part, not just because put aside the silver tsunami and all the, macro kind of trends about retiring baby boomers and whatever. ETA and the business buying movement is it's experiencing a moment, and there are more buyers than there's ever been. So that's a great thing for a seller. That could be really problematic for a buyer, right?
It is. And there's sort of a funny quip and an understanding that if the way you're going to win is by being the highest price, well, sucker, you're the loser.
Yeah.
And so, what we're really talking about are what are the tips and the tricks and the strategies for winning in, let's call it like a typical auction process,
Yep.
where you're not necessarily at the highest price and the most seller favorable terms.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most interesting things about this sector is so many people get caught up on that kind of bottom line without appreciating that a lot of these entrepreneurs, part of the reason that there are good opportunities to buy a business and grow it is because a lot of these entrepreneurs that are selling aren't as financially motivated. They're very comfortable earning their $400,000 a year that pays for their boat and their ski vacation, and you know, an extra $200,000 on purchase price is just not the needle mover for them. It is in a lot of cases, but not all of them. And so let's dive into that, because part of the strategy is how can you figure that out? And I think there's a real element to the game here of understanding people and psychology and using those initial meetings when you can get past the screening process of the brokers to try and tease out what those motivators are. And there's always motivators that go beyond money.
Can I cut you off by saying before
Please.
we even get to the auction process, before we even get to you got the email from the business broker with the teaser and the NDA,
Yeah.
that one way, it's nothing here is a silver bullet, but one way to find maybe less competition around pricing is to interact directly with a seller.
Yeah.
And if you can start talking to a seller direct without a broker involved, there is a better chance that you can align on valuation in the context of it not needing to be the highest offer on the table.
Yeah.
There are downsides to that. The sales cycle in a direct process is a lot longer, right? You oftentimes have to
Yep.
convince them to sell.
Yep.
The fact that they've hired a broker is in many cases the best proxy for motivated seller.
Yeah.
So that is the downside. But in our context here, we're going to talk mostly about, seller hired a broker is taking the business to market.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great point though. And whether it's a broker involved or not, finding out those things, those commonalities, like a popular one I see all the time. Sam, I'm curious if you see the same way. Veterans selling to veterans, right? If you're a veteran and you find your way to you're out there in the market looking for a home services business, in my experience is the likelihood of a seller choosing to go with you goes up exponentially if they're also a veteran, and you can play that up, right? There's the female entrepreneur angle, right? If you've got a selling, a female seller and you're a female searcher, that could be an opportunity to connect over, a camaraderie and entrepreneurship that's kind of unique from that angle. So yeah, there's a lot more at play than just I can offer you an extra $100,000 from the next guy.
Good point. And for a lot of our clients who are, let's call it geographically focused self-funded searchers, the I'm the local entrepreneur angle is a real one.
Huge. Yeah. Yeah, we'll get into we'll get more into that, but before we get there, let's just take a quick step back and Sam, why don't you summarize? I wasn't on last week's episode, so and it hasn't dropped yet at the time of this recording. So candidly, I don't fully know what you and Eric walked through. I assume you gave kind of a high level overview of the sell side process. Is that right? Of kind of what a seller goes through? Let's just maybe set the stage. Do you mind rolling back and give a 60,000 foot view of the sell process? So I'm a seller. I own a fledgling small business law firm that I want to take to market. What are the steps I'm going to take?
Well, part of our overview was meant to say, like, we spend a ton of time representing sellers.
Yeah. And
if there's one broad takeaway, that is, to the extent you can be proactive and prepare yourself for sale.
Yeah.
A year or 6 months or really any amount of time prior to talking with that business broker, the better. It will make it smoother of a process. You will appear more professionalized because you have your house in order. And that perception is helpful for valuation and being able to not have to scramble while under a letter of intent will allow you to focus on maybe the most important thing, which is continuing to run your business profitably.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was backing up prior to sending the marketing materials out and saying, 6 or 3 months ahead of time, to the extent you can collect all of your written agreements that you had signed over the years, customer contracts, vendor agreements, employment related agreements, organizational documents and capitalization documents. All of that stuff is going to be requested by a buyer in due diligence. Why not take the time 3 or 6 months prior
100%.
to collect it and organize it? So we spent a lot of time talking about that. And then we got into, okay, time to get the marketing process started, crafting a teaser, getting an NDA ready, preparing your sim, and then what is it like to then receive bids through the form of an IOI
Yeah.
or LOI, and then sort of carry it all the way through. And I know we're going to double click on a few of those topics, like, APA versus SPA and
Yeah.
deal structuring and all that stuff. So that was kind of all of that was in the context of selling a business, not buying.
For sure. Yeah. But really great background. And once again, I encourage you, if you had skipped last week's episode, hit pause, go back, listen to that, and then come back and pick up here, because it'll be a really great framework. Sounds like you guys were pretty
Yeah.
comprehensive. So
As a buyer, it's useful to listen to the seller episode.
Totally. So let's actually pick up with the last point you just made, and kind of the LOI process and wading through LOIs and things like that. When a seller gets presumably inundated, and anecdotally, actually, before I ask my other question, let me ask this. Anecdotally, from what I hear in the market from brokers, is that a good business, like good solid fundamentals with a good healthy asking price that's attractive to buyers, will be upwards of several hundred inbound leads for an NDA and sim. Is that align with your understanding, Sam?
Yep. Well marketed
Yeah.
business. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
just an absolute ton of competition.
So you are one of several hundred people blowing up this broker for an NDA and sim, which that in and of itself is going to be a full-time job for this broker to wade through and vet that many sellers. And it's an impossible task. So I know a lot of brokers get a bad rap, and I'll repeatedly say a good broker is worth their weight in gold. A good broker is going to have a really good process to screen and wade through what it will
Yes.
undoubtedly be a ton of riffraff, right? Unserious buyers, unqualified buyers, looky-loos, people looking for intel in the market, and things like that. But that said, there's going to be dozens of people interested in buying this business. What is it in the LOI or IOI process then that you see, or that's been successful for you, Sam, in differentiating and setting apart a buyer? How do you rise to the top of that stack with the broker to kind of put in a request, an offer, an ask for a meeting that says, "Hey, take me seriously"?
I'm going to lump together the stages of having received the teaser,
Sure.
interacting with the seller on his or her NDA, trading information and questions, an initial offer letter. That stage could take 2 days, and it could take
Well,
2 to 4 weeks.
Well, before collapsing that together, I mean, that's an important point, right? Because a lot of brokers are gatekeeping even that initial phase, right? What can you do as a buyer to be taken seriously enough for the broker to even entertain returning your email, right? And inviting you to the process to even start asking those questions.
It all goes back to the concept that at every single communication point, you are creating a perception around yourself as a buyer of professionalness, reliability, capability to close, and future owner reliability. Every touch point you should think about as either something hurting or helping your chances of winning. And so it could be as simple as Obviously, to the extent you know the broker who's sending you the deal.
Yeah.
Well, you're already going to be at an advantage of getting past the gate.
100%.
But there are so many other ways to create a perception. One being speed. To the extent that email comes in and you can quick jump on it, speed and responsiveness is a winning point.
Yeah.
But a lot of people can do that. What's another one? Another one is always going to be, assuming the broker doesn't know you, to be able to tell concisely and clearly, why is this business a good fit for you?
Yeah.
Why should you be given a chance to bid on it? Well, that's going to come down to, do you have your profile visible and clearly articulated? Do you have a website? Do you have a PDF 1 or 2 pager telling your story as a future entrepreneur? Does it have advisors and potential investors listed to create the perception that you have people helping you who are experienced? You have people that want to invest in you. Like, it is that perception around capability.
Yeah.
Do you have support letters from investors? Do you have your PFS put together so that you can quickly share your ability to make an equity injection? Do you have a support letter from a loan broker or a lender that says, hey, given a deal that underwrites, we're ready to lend? Can you quickly I should mention, do you have, whether it's a list of your criteria or an explanation as to why this business is the right fit for all of this is why you is in a way for you to quickly tell the broker, I am capable. This is a great fit. Let's go.
Yeah.
And you get past the gate just to be able to see the sim.
100%. The number one concern a broker is going to have is, do you have the money to close this deal?
Yep.
And the more you can put them at ease the earlier in the process, the more likely you are to win the process. It's just it's a simple fact. And back to our prior point of ultimate purchase price is not always the driving factor. 99 out of 100 brokers will work with a seller to accept a slightly lower purchase price with a buyer with much more certainty of closing, equity commitment letters, personal financial statement that could support the equity down payment, etc. Then another buyer who has none of that, that takes the, trust me, I have a network of investors, I'm not worried about the money, and I'll offer an extra couple 100,000. It's hugely invaluable to get past round one.
Let me give you another couple ones. I think generally tactics are well received by our listeners instead of like generalities. Totally. This kind of goes against our own lawyering, and that is, if you over lawyer an NDA, if you go mark it up with a bunch of red ink, you make it challenging to get under NDA, the broker is going to throw their hands up and at a certain point say, I just got 100 NDAs signed without an issue, and this guy is fighting me on the verbiage in this NDA. Like, let's kick him off.
Yeah,
Let's kick him out of the process.
Yeah. I tend to agree when folks reach out to me early in the process and say, hey, can you review this NDA? I'm almost never making comments unless it's something egregious. And there are some egregious things. I love the broker NDAs that include a 2-year non-compete within 250 miles. Like, you don't even know who the company, like it's ridiculous. But absent something crazy like that, I agree with you. I mean, lawsuits on NDAs are so rare anyway. It's just, you're immediately taking yourself out of the running for sure.
All right, so then let's kind of step further along into the timeline of the process.
So now you've gotten some information, you have the sim, you've maybe had a phone call with the seller to learn a little more, and you're thinking about putting in an offer. So, once again, presumably this is a good deal, so you're not the only player in town. How do you differentiate yourself?
There is, to be clear, no silver bullet, but we'll go through some little tactics. One of which is that buying a small business in our world is always done with incomplete information. Mm-hmm. And so if what you do is right after you review the SIM or the SIP, you send the broker a list of 50 questions, and it's like highly minutia focused questions, it is so easy to kick you out of a process
Yeah.
because you need to go into the IOI and LOI stage. Yes, you should ask questions. Yes, you should demand enough to feel solid about the value you're proposing. But if you're essentially putting out there like a mini diligence checklist, it is the wrong time and you're going to get kicked out of the
Yep.
process. Like, stick to the biggest pieces of information that, if answered one way versus another, would meaningfully dictate your valuation would change or your structure would
Yep.
change. And so I think that's a big one. I think how you communicate matters a lot. You know, like if you ask a bunch of generic questions that aren't sort of nuanced to the industry or the business at hand, it's very clear you copy pasted. Another one, like another easy to kick you out. You know, at this phase, you're probably not talking to the seller. You're probably going through the broker. But if at this phase, you also get an opportunity to meet with the seller online, in person, maybe a site visit, holy cow, is that an opportunity?
Yeah.
So, at all opportunities to turn digital communication into a better, more personal form,
Take it.
call the broker
Take it.
instead of emailing
Yeah.
them. Get on a video versus a phone call with a seller. The worst conversations with sellers I ever have are the ones where it's a phone call. Neither of you see a
Mm-hmm.
face to a face. There is no personal nature to it. So try to make it about that relationship building if at all possible.
Yeah. And what are some of the things? I mean, you've been a seller before several times, if I recall. What are some
Yeah.
of the things that sellers are looking for in those meetings? Again, this is back to our earlier point of ultimate purchase price isn't always the driving factor. What are some of the things that you as a seller have looked for when you've gone into those meetings to say, to make that decision of whether or not this is the right buyer or buyer group?
Well, obviously, if I was a seller, I was looking for the maximum purchase price.
Well,
So,
I know you, right? Yeah.
all right. So let's assume you, the buyer, now, like we are the buyers, and our goal is not to pay the maximum purchase price. So, one of the things we're trying to do on those calls is to understand what is most important to the seller. And frankly, like if they're very clinical, they're very kind of no bullshit to the point about max price being
Yeah.
the most important consideration. Like that's not a reason to kill a deal, but I think it's a reason to say, like, if I put an offer in and I don't hit, like that's okay. I'm gonna
Yep.
have to move on.
Yep. That's good information.
Um, so I think you're trying to gather that information as to what's truly important to the seller. I think you're trying to create, again, any perception you can around how to win other than highest price. And the only way we, the sort of SMB buyer who's an entrepreneur and, call searcher or whatever, is creating the perception that you can be a efficient, competent buyer, get the deal done, but that you're going to be a highly competent operator.
Yeah.
In many ways, you're going to be just like them. And I know it's easy to say, like, the son they never had is the concept, but you need to do all the things they do. Like, go and see what that person wears in their picture on their website.
Yeah.
Mirror that, mirror the clothing they wear, mirror the terminology they use. Try to mirror the seller so that the seller creates a feeling about you that is strong,
Mm-hmm.
irrespective of the price you offer.
Yeah, no, 100%. I often think about that and tell clients, if you're buying a plumbing company and the plumber wears a ratty branded t-shirt and torn up jeans and you show up in a Patagonia vest, 9 times out of 10, you just took 3 steps backwards. Again, there's exceptions to the rule. And with some sellers that even, the good old boy blue collar worker if you've got the highest number, you're going to win. It doesn't really matter what you're wearing. But with so many of these guys, they want to see themselves in you. They are immediately trying to evaluate, you know, what's this guy? How is this going to translate when he stands up in front of the crew on day one? Right. And if they're blue collar, visa immigrant workforce and you're a, Patagonia vest or, suit private equity guy, that's going through the seller's mind of like, my guys are not going to do this. They're not going to go for this. And just a quick anecdote we've talked about before on here. My wife and I recently transacted and bought a wraps business several years ago. That was
Yeah.
one of the first questions the seller asked us, knowing that my wife would be in the day-to-day management role. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to level with you. This may be the first time that most of the guys working in this shop have ever worked for or reported to a woman. And how are you going to handle that? What's your approach?" And I knew, I've been through hundreds of deals. I knew exactly what he was doing. The answer, the actual words of the answer probably mattered less than just trying to understand, like, okay, how does Tara think about this? How's she going to approach it? And is she going to be thoughtful? I think if nothing else, he just wanted to gauge, is she going to blow me off, or is she going to be thoughtful about, like, hey, this is going to be new for the employees. How do I approach it? And things like that. I think I know, because I have a close personal relationship with a broker, we were not the highest bid. There were bids that were more money. He felt very, very comfortable with us, I think, because of interactions like that.
And I'll sort of go further down the road on that point. Try to use words that are common language words. Don't be ripping around words like adjusted EBITDA
Yeah.
and, indemnification caps and like all this. I call it like banker speak. Like, use simple terms. Don't try and turn it into an interrogation in those
Yeah.
conversations. Like, you don't need to know what the average gross margin was for the last like, what you need to do is get them talking about their life's work. How old were they when they started the business? Had they just had kids? What was life like? Well, who was your first customer? Get them telling a
Yeah.
story and feeling emotions tied to your conversation, and everything else will float away, including the fact that you don't know anything about the industry that you're looking to acquire in,
Yeah.
and acknowledge that. Say, hey, look, I don't have deep experience in automobile wraps, but I have experience as being an entrepreneur and a leader of some people and
Yeah.
growing businesses. Speak to the experience you have, acknowledge maybe where you're coming up short. All of these things, I guarantee you, most people that are listening are saying, but yeah, that's so easy and duh.
Yeah.
But these
You'd
are
be
the
shocked.
things that work.
Yeah.
It's like going to the doctor when they say exercise and eat healthy. It's like, well,
You're like, well, no, there's got to be
duh.
something else, right?
Yeah. Anyway, here we
No,
are.
it's a great point, and as I think it through, I don't even know that if you were interviewing sellers or brokers, they would be able to articulate it. But I think they can feel when you're asking questions that you can otherwise get the answer to. It falls
Yeah.
flat, right? It feels off. When they provide you with a sim with 3 years of P&Ls, and you sit down with the seller and use that time to say, well, what was your gross margin and how did that grow the last 3 years? As opposed to, I noted that your gross margin compressed by 8% last year. Talk me through what was going on in the business that caused that to happen. They feel that difference, and you come across as a much more engaged buyer than just, bro, I gave you the information. Like, I don't know, let's pull up the P&L together and look. And it starts to feel like a waste of time. Even if they couldn't articulate, hey, you're wasting my time, they feel that. And it's incumbent on you to use that time with the seller, A, to learn the things you can't learn on paper, and B, to sell yourself, right? Hugely important. But before we run out of time, we're talking a lot about how to win the deal, though. When does a buyer know when to walk away? And again, I presume you, Sam, with how active you are in the market, you've walked away from a lot of deals that you've gotten Sims on and had seller meetings. What are the things you're looking for? Maybe outside of the obvious, right? You get a P&L and, see some glaring thing. I mean, that's the easy stuff. But talk through some of the strategies for a buyer, then maybe some of the red flags with sellers and things like that when a buyer should be comfortable taking a step back and potentially walking.
Yeah, I almost never is it one obvious glaring thing.
Yeah.
Usually it's over time, over interactions with the seller, you sort of start lining up red flags.
You get a vibe.
And then ultimately you sort of, one of those straws breaks the camel's back. You never know which one it's going to be. So I think you're always collecting data points and red flags. So, like I think there's I'll put them into two buckets. One is like deal transaction related. If the seller is negotiating every single point down to the minutia and almost is over engineering the deal from their side.
Yeah.
Or is like pitting your offer against somebody else's and saying, well, they had you beat here, you need to match.
Mm-hmm.
And then you match. And then they're like, well, they have you beat here. You have like getting, death by a million paper cuts. Like that's a financial or a deal related one.
Yeah.
Another one is like over negotiating a non-compete. Like at a certain point, it is a big red flag.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest, easiest red flags is any type of. I can usually respect one modest pushback of like, your radius is way too big. This should be, 100 miles of the location, not 500 miles. But repeated pushback on the non-compete, massive red flag, especially shrinking from 5 years, right? That if they're pushing for a 2-year non-compete instead of a 5-year non-compete, almost certainly they are planning to compete with you.
Yep. I would then let's create another bucket, which is like qualitative things.
Mm-hmm.
So, a big one is you don't really want a seller who is so important to the business that it would fall apart without him or her.
Yeah.
So go on a ride along.
Yeah.
Like demand a ride along. Does that phone ring every 20 seconds? Does every customer and every employee, does everybody go through the seller personally? That's a big red flag.
If every sales call ends up with a call to the owner to ask a question, you don't have a salesperson, you have a sales clerk, right? Yeah. The little things like that can be hugely valuable information.
So I think I don't want to overdo it because I think we want to get a little further into, maybe further in the process. But I find that a lot of searchers, a lot of first time buyers, it's almost like they're going through motions and not thinking about every one of these interactions and the implications. So yeah.
Love it. Well, so let's assume you've been successful thus far. You now have a deal under LOI. I think a lot of buyers, to their own detriment, they obviously know that's not the end game, right? There's a transaction to get through, but mentally they think like, okay, I've gotten the seller past this hurdle. The deal's mine now, which, like I said, is to their detriment because that's not necessarily true. The seller is continuing to evaluate every interaction with you as a buyer. So let's talk through the deal process really quickly. What are some of the strategies there and things to keep in mind to continue to build that positive momentum and positive rapport? One big one that comes to mind for me, Sam, curious your thoughts on this, is due diligence, right? If you've been easy to work with through the LOI process and you get an LOI inked and then all of a sudden you slow things down, you take 3 weeks to start requesting information, or the opposite, you hit them an hour after a signed LOI with a 17-page diligence request list saying, my accountants need this in 48 hours to keep the timeline on track. How you approach diligence can be a deal, can make or break a deal here. I'm curious your thoughts on that. And then let's move beyond diligence as well and some of your other other thoughts about during the deal process? How do you keep that seller engaged and continue to win the deal?
All right, I'm gonna like err towards tactics because again, I think they're more valuable sometimes, or people appreciate them more.
That's why we have you. Legal counsel is all theory, but I like having a buyer and seller on the phone. I have sample size of one buying a business, so
All right, well, that's a bigger sample size than most.
that's fair. That's fair.
I think it comes down always in any relationship to communication. So some tactics I've used over the years are as soon as you sign an LOI, set up a weekly standing call with the seller, maybe the broker as well. Nobody else, no lawyers, and have it be a time where you go through your checklist with them.
Yeah.
Like make sure every single week they are seeing the progress made, the steps left to go until closing, and how potentially their own pace of information share and whatnot is impacting when the closing will occur.
Yeah. Totally.
So I really like that like Tuesday afternoon call at 1 o'clock Eastern every week with the seller, no
Love it.
exceptions.
Yep.
Another one might be that, you know, you have to decide which of your advisors are you going to let interact directly with the seller? Or, are you going to allow Q of E provider to talk with the seller directly, or are you going to intermediate that? I think it's very personal.
Yeah.
Right. I'm trying to think of more tactics.
And try and be self-aware there too, because I know this about myself with how busy I am and can get behind on email and things like that. If I'm the point of contact, I will be a bottleneck 98% of the time. I know that about myself. So I'm always going to suggest and facilitate direct contact. There's a high degree of self-awareness here that I think, any of you listeners who are in the buyer seat need to have to understand those things. And if your best kind of what you bring best to a transaction is not immediate response and hyper organization of your inbox, don't make yourself the bottleneck. Just get in front of that so that you can get out of your own way.
What's funny is, Kev, like we've been talking for, going on 45 minutes. Nothing here has anything to do with legalities. Nothing has anything to do with like technical accounting due diligence. It is all soft skills.
This is a people
that
game.
Anybody can do this well.
Yeah.
And it seems so simple. And yet that is the whole benefit, is anybody can do this.
Yeah. Now, not everyone should do this, but yes, anybody can do this.
It's a good point. It's a good point.
Oh man. Okay, so diligence, speed, how you communicate, organization, deal organization is massive. I actually had a broker, close personal contact, push back on me. I'm repping a buyer on a deal that they're representing the seller, push back on our diligence request list and said, hey, I have this other diligence request list. It's in a format I prefer with the seller and easier to organize. Do you mind if I take your data and reorganize it? And a lot of people, back to my prior point, would say, well, let me go ahead and do that. I, being very self-aware, said, absolutely knock yourself out, organize it however you want to, as long as I get the data.
Yeah.
But that type of organization and being open and flexible to that feedback from the seller of like, hey, I see what you just sent me. This is going to be a nightmare for me to deal with. Can we X, Y, or Z? Be open to that. Be flexible. You want to be seen not as a pushover, but as accommodating where you're able to be accommodating. And if you get hyper fixated on the format of a diligence request list, if it's in Word versus Excel, you're going to lose all the credibility that you need to have on a difficult conversation about, hey, you're just off on your working capital analysis and I need more working capital. So, really important to be thoughtful and flexible where you can, I think.
100%. To be clear, every bit of this advice should give listeners confidence that there are ways to win other than by price. That the sort of typical financial buyer coming from a big city wearing fancy watch isn't always going to win. And that's the point. That's why this is such a great opportunity. You don't have to be some industry expert with a committed fund of money in order to win a deal.
Totally. That said, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that price is 90% of that analysis. I kid with the percentage, but it is a big component. That's not to minimize, that's not to minimize how important that is to kind of win where and when you can. I think a lot of these other strategies are A, just best practices, and B, a great example of you can still have a seat at the table even if you can't be the highest bid. And for a lot of you out there that are looking at the kind of higher tier of the self-funded search range, that is now the bottom tier of the private equity range. You will constantly, if you're looking in that, 750, 1.5 million EBITDA size business, you will constantly be the lower bid against, some of these small funds that are able to pay 5, 6, 7x multiples that you're just never going to be able to do with an SBA loan. That doesn't mean you're going to lose.
Yep.
Once again, I know sample size of one, the deal we were doing, that seller was never, ever, ever, ever going to sell to a private equity fund. It just wasn't going to happen. It's not part of his ethos. It's not part of the plan for his brand. And so, there was no private equity fund in the world that was going to come in with an additional turn of EBITDA higher than mine that was going to get selected, right? He may have decided to hold out for another individual buyer offering a higher price. But the point is, the deals are out there. You have the opportunity to win, not just on price, even when the competition might be outbidding you.
And so what does that mean? It might mean that you need to see a lot more deals than you thought because 7 out of 10 sellers may only care about the highest price.
Yeah.
And so therefore you're looking for the 3 out of 10. You're just going to have to look under more rocks than most.
100%. Yep. It's a numbers game as much as it is a people game. And if you want to transact, if you want to buy a business, you've got to get out there and do the reps because it's going to take a lot of requested SIMs. It's going to take a lot of broker meetings. It's going to take a lot of NDAs to ultimately stick a landing, but you'll find the deal. They're out there. We'll wrap it up there, Sam, unless you have any final words on tips to navigate the sell side process.
I'm going to save all the good ones for later.
I love it. Future episodes. As always, guys, give us a 5-star review. Share this episode with a friend that you think is interested in ETA and reach out. You can find us on all the socials at SMB Law Group, as well as smblaw.group for the website. Shoot us a note, fire us a DM of what you like, what you don't like, as long as what you don't like isn't me. If you don't like Eric, please send the feedback and let us know what you want us to talk about in future episodes.
That was fun, Kev. Thanks for hosting, man.
Likewise.